Good evening, good evening. Well, I had missed my Friday stream because I had been asleep that night. I slept pretty late into the evening and into the night, so I sort of missed it. And then I ended up reading the three parts I had typed out. Took quite a while to do. So, since I missed Friday, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the things I wanted to talk about then, but also some other things that I feel are important to serve as sort of refreshers, I guess, because I had talked to some different people today online, and I feel it's important to speak on these issues. Hey, Frank D, welcome, welcome. So I talked to a guy over on the Duran channel, and I tried to throw a bunch of facts and figures, and wouldn't you know it, but YouTube, of course, kept taking it down. Everywhere I go, even anymore when I have like regular discussions with people, just normal discussions. I'm not even talking about anything that should be considered something that would normally be censored by YouTube at this point, because they're just going crazy now. Because I was just talking about facts and figures. I wasn't talking about anything that, I wasn't bashing any other little mamby-pamby protected groups or nothing like that. Stuff that they would normally remove your comment for. I wasn't doing anything like that. All I was doing was just talking about military things, and I was trying to show this man why China is the world's superpower, and I was throwing all the facts and figures I had. And hey, welcome, Welder Princess, Rebecca Rage, Eric Martin, and Frank D. Great to see you all. So I went to go post, and I fortunately I had copied the comment so I could paste it over and over again. I kept altering it. Finally, I think it finally stayed up, but I had to misspell so many damn words. It was ludicrous. It was a total lunacy. But I explained the whole Chinese industry to this man. By the way, the thumbnail is their new H-20 stealth bomber with their two J-20 fighter jets flanking it on each side. Well, two of them. They have over 200 of these aircraft. Our best aircraft, the F-22 Raptor, which we should have kept producing, but we didn't. We now have less than 200. There is actually a storm that actually destroyed quite a few of them on the ground, which is, crazy. It's ludicrous. But instead, they opted for this damn F-35, which is supposed to be the jack of all trades, but definitely does none of them well whatsoever at all. It's flying garbage. Just like I talk about the Zumwalt being floating garbage. Well, okay, so as far as, I'll put that on hold for a second. Now, as far as what's going on in what I've been talking about lately over in the proxy that the West keeps dumping all this money and resources in, weakening it and diminishing itself in the process, hollowing itself out, which this guy I talked to over there didn't seem to understand, that we had hollowed ourselves out severely, and that this new generation of woke troops is not going to be able to do the job when it counts. They're not up to the task. We got our troops on welfare. You see, when I was in the Army, it actually used to be an honorable career. You used to actually get paid pretty well. I mean, I remember it being one of the best times in my entire life insofar as feeling like I achieved something. When I came home from the war and I was promoted and I started getting all this extra pay, the bonuses were excellent back then. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars for bonuses. It was good money. It was legit good money. It was a honorable career. Now we got our troops on welfare. They're a whole new generation. They're woke. They can't train properly because they lack ammunition to be able to use for live fire exercises. By and large, this is the case for the most part. They've been having that issue for quite some time, and now it's gotten worse with sending all this stuff abroad that we've been sending abroad. They're in dire straits right now, and they're on welfare too, to boot. They can't train properly. They're hollowed out, thinned out. They cannot make recruiting goals. And it's bad, and it's worse than what they're actually claiming. It's more than a couple dozen, thousand troops. It's more than that. It's a lot more than that. They've lost due to the purge over the mandates and the the thing in the arm, they've lost a few 100,000 troops, and they're not making recruiting goals. They're not. All they're doing at this point is replenishing the people that are retiring or getting the hell out because they know what time it is. All they're doing is replenishing some of those people. But because they're not making recruiting goals, they're not adequately keeping the numbers up. Our armed forces has shrunk now from, it was over 2.4 million. And back when I was in, it was even bigger. It was like 2.5 million. Now, it's almost to 1941 levels before we entered World War II. So it's shrinking. It's shrinking incredibly. Hey, Soul, great to see you. Great to see you. Yeah, so it's shrinking immensely, but they're not anywhere near what they need to be able to compete with China, the world superpower in real terms. But back to the proxy. They can't compete with Russia either. Now, a lot of people have been talking lately about what's been going on there. So I'm going to show you a little visual here. The Russians, when they do their fortifications like they're doing around Kherson, I drew a little example for everybody of what a defensive line would be looking like. Most likely it would look something very much like so. Hold on, let me flip this around. Okay, here it is. Now, let this thing focus here. It would look something very much like this. Now, what you would have, hold on a second. You would have something like that, like a road. You'd have a road going in. Is it still, what's wrong with this camera? Hold on a second. Can everybody see that all right? Because I sure can't. This damn thing. Okay. You'd have something like this, where you would have, these are individual, like, infantry troops in your standard wedge formation. This is a road right here. Now, the Russians have been fortifying Kherson, and you got, like, tanks right here, if you can see them. This is, maybe the lighting's not right or something. I don't know. I thought it was the camera lens, maybe. Hey, Ken, great to see you. I think I saw you in there. Let me see real quick. Is that you? Oh, yeah, great to see you, Ken. Yeah, I'm not going to hold anything back. This is important. Now, people are talking about Kherson, so you know what? I felt like I would draw an example of what a line would likely look like in that area, where you would have these being anti-tank ditches, like I talked about when I talked about the anti-tank ditches in my story. Here's some assembled to where you would have the troops and the engineers digging these to where they would bottleneck anything trying to come through. You would have these anti-tank and anti-personnel mines spread all throughout here. And these are barbed wire, these orange things here. Hold on a second. I know I can fix this camera. Give me 1 second. It's hard to see this. I know it is. It's got to be something I can do to fix this. Okay, maybe I should do it here. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Now, you see, you got Czech hedgehogs right here. You got the Czech hedgehogs, which are anti-vehicle barriers. They're like twisted rail ties or wood sometimes. And you got the road right here. You've got these machine gun nests here in the brown. See, this green right here, this light green is a trench system. Got a trench system linking the machine gun nest, the anti-tank nest, where they would put like an anti-tank missile system right here, something potent like a Cornet missile. And here's another machine gun nest here. And artillery, I wrote artillery with arrows pointing back, because artillery would be further back from these lines. Now, in my story, the Americans, of course, had no access to anti-tank mines or Czech hedgehogs, so what they did was they made dragon's teeth out of rubble, which is where they basically piled rubble up in little stacks that are about like 4 or 5 feet tall, and then they cemented them together if they had to do it like that. They had thousands of people working on their line that they quote-unquote conscripted from the civilian population to even be able to build a line like that quick. So in my story, there was the second line. And you remember I talked about the anti-tank ditches that were ringing around the St. Elizabeth's compound. They would have dug these ditches to where they were in a V shape, to where if a vehicle drove in, it would just get stuck. Now, here's how the Russians would likely be doing things at Kherson. You'd have these Czech hedgehogs, some razor wire, C-wire, concertina wire strands here. You have this area saturated with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines around these ditches. And this road, you would be able to funnel enemies through the road because you would have all these barriers, Czech hedgehogs to slow the armor down, then a fence made of concertina wire, then these mines and ditches. You'd have a trench line running right below the machine gun nest, which would be elevated up to give them prime, basically a prime point of view to be able to, fire at their targets. And you'd have an anti-tank position back here, raised up even higher. I'm trying to, here, let me do it like this so y'all can see what I'm talking about. These are enemy tanks approaching. Now, we often hear about how the Russians annihilate the proxy forces that we're supporting every time they attack Kherson. Well, this is why. Because they would have fortifications that would look along the lines of this. They would look just like this, where they would bottleneck any enemy traffic, forcing them to go through the road, thus being able to ambush them with machine gun fire, anti-tank fire. Also, there would be troops in these trenches that run in front and below these nests back here that are behind. They would be elevated, and the troops could fire out of the trenches. The machine gun nests would be somewhat elevated so they could get a proper point of view, that they could, a panorama sort of view of the whole area here. Same with the anti-tank nest. They'd be raised up a little higher. Like, say this would be a hill coming down here. You would have, like, they'd be like terracing the defenses, where they would be terraced to where the bottom would be the trench, then the machine guns would be raised up slightly over the trench, like sandbags and all that stuff. Same with the anti-tank nest, and then they would be back here, further up the hill, raised up even higher so that they could also fire out anywhere that there would be vehicles appearing. The Czech hedgehogs would serve to slow everything down. Sure, individual troops can move them out the way, but while they're trying to do that, they're going to get machine gunned because machine guns are going to be ripping over there, hitting anything that comes near the Czech hedgehogs. Then there's a layer of barbed wire, razor wire behind those, anti-tank mines, and anti-tank ditches. So even if they remove the Czech hedgehogs, the barbed wire, while they're under heavy fire from these positions all the way back here, they'd still have to maneuver around through all these mines, maneuver around these anti-tank ditches, and then get through this barbed wire, and then there'd be trenches here where everybody's firing from. They wouldn't be able to remove all this stuff. They'd be forced through here and get destroyed. So when you hear about the Russians firing their artillery, which would be off the map entirely, they'd be firing their artillery, hitting anything out here that's approaching, while they're also, as they get closer, being fired at by troops in the trenches, machine gun nests, and also these anti-tank positions. And like I said, the artillery is off the map here, written in the red, artillery off the map, way back here, miles away from this front line. Now, when I talked about the second line in my story, they didn't have the Czech hedgehogs. Some parts of it had anti-tank ditches, but mostly it was a series of machine gun nests and anti-tank positions, and they also used a lot of rubble to serve as bunkers that they could shoot up out of, which would be sort of like what these trench systems here did. And they had razor wire, they had concertina wire. And in front of that, they would have basically the dragon's teeth to impede vehicles that they would have made out of, like, rubble and, whatever kind of concrete mixed up that they could, like, slap together to hold it all in place. Now, dragon's teeth would just bottleneck the vehicles, kind of like what Czech hedgehogs do, only they're stationary and they can't be rolled out of the way. They can't be moved. So what the Russians are doing in Kherson, of course, they would have things like anti-tank and anti-personnel mines that they would put amid their anti-tank ditches that they would have dug here. They'd have layers of razor wire, the concertina wire, strands, and barbed wire running through that. They would have all that, and behind that, the trench, and then they would have the machine gun positions along the road here, and also spread out like so, just like here. Another machine gun nest. You'd have trenches running between the machine gun nests and the anti-tank positions so that troops could run back and forth, while they're protected in the trench. They would be protected in these trenches, and they could run back and forth if they had to run for ammo, send a runner to go get more ammunition. They could run back to their forward depots through the trenches, out of the area, get their ammo, run back, run through the trench, get to the machine gun nest, keep up firing. Somebody would be firing while they sent somebody to get ammo, of course, but when they're starting to get low, that's how they would be doing it. Same with the anti-tank positions. And these trenches, you would have troops in the trenches right below these machine gun nests that would be firing up out of the trenches. Sort of like in my story, how they were firing up out of these primitive bunkers they made in these old basements that, somehow survived all the shelling and everything else that happened to the city. Now, this is the road here. So there's the tanks approaching. Tanks. They'd just get stuck because there's no way in hell they're going to be able to remove all these Czech hedgehogs, then smash through the barbed wire, and then maneuver around all this, these anti-tank mines and anti-tank ditches. They would get stuck if they try to cross the ditches, or they'd be hitting mines and getting annihilated in the minefield. And, then there's a whole nother fencing of barbed wire, razor wire right here, and then the trench right behind it, because the troops would be firing through there. So when you hear about Russians fortifying Kherson, this is the type of stuff they're doing. This is what they're doing. Everything like their artillery would be miles back from this fortified line. So when they talk about defense lines, this is a classic example of a type of defense line. Classic example. So now here you have your wedge formation of troops approaching. They're finding all this stuff. So, then they're going to be bottlenecked through the road where they'll just get machine gunned or shot up by riflemen or whatever else. Same with any vehicles that are bold enough to try to funnel their way through here. So every time the proxy forces attacked, what they did was they got annihilated by Russian artillery. Well, now you see why. Because they did these human wave assaults where they tried to do big rolling shield maneuvers behind whatever few vehicles they had. The troops would be like following their vehicles into battle, but you would have artillery shells landing and blowing all of them away, and then when they got close enough, they wouldn't be able to get through these barriers because they'd be getting shot up by machine gun and anti-tank missiles. Like Kornets would be firing from here and blowing these tanks away. Kornets are actually highly effective Russian anti-tank missiles because Kornets have already been tried and tested and proven in battle because the Houthi militias got Iranian-supplied Kornet missiles that are made by license in Iran. And the Saudis, who use our M1 Abrams tanks, have been able to destroy them fairly easy in specially prepared ambushes. So the Russians would be doing the same to these Ukrainian, T-64s or T-62s, whatever they have anymore. They used to have a bunch of T-64s and T-62 tanks, but Ukraine lost most of their tank fleet. So now they have these Western mercenaries fighting for them who are using Western-designed vehicles. Now, I don't know how many tanks they've gotten since they've lost, 95% of their tank fleet. I mean, if they're getting, German Leopard 1 tanks or old American M60 A3s, then, they'll get destroyed just the same. These Kornets are damn effective missiles, and that's what would be like. This is the defense line right here. Czech hedgehogs. Razor wire, concertina wire, barbed wire, fencing, mines, lots of mines, and anti-tank ditches, and a minefield. More barb and razor wire to protect the trenches if somehow they could get a path through all of this before getting annihilated by all the machine gun fire, rifle fire, RPG fire, anti-tank missile fire from these positions spaced out. If they could somehow get through all that, that would be basically the whole summary of what's been happening. Every time they've attacked Kherson, they've been annihilated because of these types of fortifications. These things are basically what entails a very well-prepared defense line, just like this. This is how it would be set up, you know. Alan knows what I'm talking about, AURA, and it's great to see you too, Snafu. I'm glad you stopped in. So, whenever they're talking about building up Kherson and evacuating the citizens from the town, it's the same concept as what I put in my stories, where in the capital battle, they evacuated most of the citizens underground in the subway tunnels and sewers and everywhere else. And they while they fought above ground to try to hold these defense lines. Now in the American defense lines, they didn't have any access to mines because there's no real mine stockpiles up in the cap area. So they didn't have minefields, they didn't have Czech hedgehogs, but they did have dragon's teeth, which is they built out of rubble and concrete mix. They did have dragon's teeth, and they also had razor wire. They had their trench systems made out of the basement bunker systems, because you would have bunkers here too, of course. I mean, that's what these anti-tank missile positions here would be, and these machine gun positions here. They would be like these sandbagged or concrete or whatever type of bunkers that they built for them, So this would be an example, prime example, of a badass, well-fortified defensive line. Like, this is like an ideal defensive line, because you see these tanks rolling up on these Czech hedgehogs here. These tanks are going to get stuck, and they're either going to have to take their chances on the road and get blown away by anti-tank missiles like Kornet missiles, or they're going to try and find a way to remove these while they're getting shot at and blown apart by anti-tank missiles, or hit by artillery if they've honed in their howitzers or rocket artillery for right here where these vehicles and troops are rolling up to. I mean, that's what's been happening in Kherson, exactly like this, just like this. That's exactly what's been happening. Same with other parts of that proxy nation. That's why there's so many dead. That's why they lose on average, thousands a day. What is it, like 4,000 Ukrainians a day die over there? I mean, because the Russians have ground them down over the course of 7 months. They have not been dislodged for 7 whole months. But this is just what I wanted to convey to show an example of what a defense line looks like. A good one, too. Like I said, artillery would be miles away, further back from the line, because they'd be, because artillery can fire, well over 10 miles, well over 12 miles. Most artillery howitzers can fire nearly 20 miles, some even further. It depends if you're using rocket-assisted projectiles or what it is, what type of howitzer, what type of munition, what type of charges you have, Fuse charge combination is everything. You can have timed fuse where you can burst shells over the enemy's head, or you can have it land and actually sit there and go off later if you're using a timed fuse, or you can have PD fuses, which is the most common, where you have point detonation, where you fuse your shell to basically explode on impact. When I was in field artillery, we used a lot of PD fusing. Very rarely did we use timed fuses. We used timed fuses when we were shooting illumination rounds, which are white phosphorus rounds, Willie Pete's. And when they go off in the air, it's like a giant illuminated flare type of effect. But if you make a mistake with an illumination round and it crashes into the enemy, it burns them to death with white phosphorus, burns them alive, and it's a miserable end. There's an instance of a truck. It was an enemy technical in Iraq that actually got hit with a point detonation illume round, burned them all up, burned their vehicle to basically melted all the metal and everything. Nasty way to go. But anyway, I just wanted to, show some illustration for this type of thing. This would be what a normal, good and effective defense line would be like. These would be the infantry troops showing up and being like, oh shit, we can't get through this, Because if they somehow decided they felt like they wanted to go through these Czech hedgehogs, they'd run into this razor wire and have to get through it. And then if they did get through it, they'd walk on anti-personnel mines and get blown away. But keep in mind, while they're approaching, they're being fired on by all the troops in the trenches. They're being fired at by machine gun fire, once it can actually see them, sight them in. Yeah, so it's a bad deal. But, yeah, that's it. There's the road. The road to Kherson. Yeah, you don't want to get funneled through the road because that's like basically a good way to die. Lose a lot of vehicles, lose a lot of troops. But anyways, yep. But now back to China, the biggest threat of all. You know what I'm basically writing about right now. Well, I talked to this guy in that comment over there on the Duran channel, which is a good channel when they're talking about Europe, but they're not so. I don't think that they're so knowledgeable about Asia. They don't know. They really don't know anything about Asia, because this guy I was talking to was trying to tell me that that America, their army's still good, and I'm like, no, bro. I'm like, our army's woke and depleted and hollowed out, and we've given away most of our weapons, and we can't replace them. How do the people not know that? It's like these people don't understand the realities we're living through. It's like, no, we don't have the same military as it was when I was in it. When I was in it 10 years ago, it was still a professional fighting force, and those were some of the best years of my life. But the new, woke, depleted, hollowed out military, nah, man. We're not even, we're nothing like we used to be. Nothing. Nothing. Yep. Oh, yeah, I'll see you later, Alan, man. Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, give me a call later, man. Anybody, give me a call. Oh, yeah, give Snafu my number, man. If he's still in here. Thanks for coming, Snafu, man. If you're still in here, just go get my number from Alan. Hey, Brogan, great to see you. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. But, yeah, so, our military is not the same military anymore. And China has greatly surpassed us, and they are the world superpower in real terms, and here's why. They have the biggest land forces on the earth. All y'all that have been with me for a while, y'all know this. Their paramilitary, which is their parallel military, it's like they have two militaries, two whole militaries. It's like they got their paramilitary and their regular military. Regular military, they have 4 million active duty, cream of the crop. Like that's their best forces. They have their active forces. They have 4 million of them, which is the biggest active duty military on earth. They have 5 million reserves for their military. That's 9 million total military forces. Then their paramilitary is 20 million. 20 million. That's their national and marine militias, so their PLA Strategic Reserve, and their National Construction Corps, and their People's Armed Police, which is like the fanatical Waffen-SS type of force for the CCP, basically. I mean, these guys are like commie fanatics. They're like the Praetorian Guard for the regime, sort of like the SS was in Hitler's Germany for them. But, that's their paramilitary forces. There's 20 million between all of those different branches of their paramilitary. Their armed forces are oh yeah, thank you, Alan, thank you. Their armed forces are ginormous, man. They're huge. They're huge. They're a massive threat. Their ground forces, nobody comes close to their overall grand total ground forces of 29 million. Nobody, not even Russia has anywhere near that many, and Russia's the second most powerful overall nation on the earth right now. But China is the world superpower hegemon in real terms. They have the biggest combat air fleet by a long shot. I mean, it's enormous. The amount of fighters and tactical ground attack aircraft they possess, and they're all very capable, very modern aircraft. We're talking 4.5 or 5 generation aircraft, 5th generation. These aircraft are extremely capable, and some of the designs that are similar to the old Russian designs, like the Su-30 MKKs and things like that they bought from Russia about 20 years ago, they've upgraded them to make them even better than the original Russian designs. The radar suites and the weapon systems on board, all of it, fire control systems, they're all more advanced than the original Russian systems were. Now, the Chinese designs of aircraft are some of the best aircraft in the world. No Western source wants to admit to these facts. If you want real numbers of what the Chinese actually have versus what a lot of Western sources try to bullshit you with and tell you, you can go get the production numbers. Then you cross-check the production numbers with whatever's been retired, sold, maybe lost in accidents, because aircrafts have accidents time to time. All of them do around the world. what's been sold, kept, put in storage, all of that, what's active still. You cross-check the production numbers with all of those factors and whatever comes out of that. And I'm saying for each and every aircraft, and what comes out of that is your final number. So all the numbers that I've shown on this channel are the most accurate, most realistic numbers that anybody's ever going to see, because I take the time to do that. Western sources are highly biased against other nations. They're highly biased. So I go and I do my own research, and I arrive at much different numbers. And some of the Eastern sources that I've looked at confirm the numbers that I actually found. And when I say Eastern sources, I'm talking about sources from other parts of the world that like mostly in Asia, like Southeast Asian sources, like military sources that keep track of these things, so on and so forth. I'm not talking Chinese. I mean, like, there's like people that are into study of international militaria, kind of like myself, that, live in Vietnam or Thailand, that do this, as a hobby or maybe even for a living as an analyst. I don't know, but I look at all sorts of different sources, and my numbers, they seem to be the most accurate out of all the different numbers I've ever seen. So China outnumbers us by over 1,000 aircraft for their combat air fleet. And most of that number is their tactical fighter bomber, or their ground attack, sometimes called aircraft category, and also their fighter jets, okay? And then their strategic bomber fleet is larger than our strategic bomber fleet by basically 2 times the size of what we have. We have 156 strategic bombers. China has over 242 now that they've started production of their H-20 stealth bomber, which is what's on the thumbnail, along with the J-20 stealth fighter aircraft. So China has this enormous combat air fleet, although they don't have as many support aircraft being like mid-air refuelers, AWACS, cargo aircraft, trainers. China doesn't have as many support aircraft as what we have, but China's catching up in that category too, and will soon have an overall air force that's even larger than ours. Even though their combat air fleet, their combat planes, they have more combat air firepower, basically. Their firepower in the air is vastly bigger than ours. Their ability to fight a war in the air is vastly bigger than ours. But I'm saying that China is starting to catch up in the support aircraft category itself. They're building more cargo aircraft. They're building more mid-air refuelers. I mean, they have these things, but they don't have the numbers of those just yet, but they're catching up. China has over 500 enormous military factory complexes. They're the single biggest steel producer on Earth. They produce more steel than the next 20 nations combined. They only produce in the, tens of millions, and maybe in India's case, 110 million in their case. But China produces enormous quantities of steel, over 1 billion tons, regular tons, imperial tons, I guess they call that. They produce over 1 billion tons of steel. When it comes to tungsten, which has immense military applications for armor and ammunition, which, if you have a binding agent like nickel, it makes things for like penetrators for bullets, for anti-material bullets, tungsten bullets, tungsten armor. They put a percentage of tungsten in the tank armor, the rolled homogeneous armor, which is RHA, which is steel, rolled steel armor. If you have a tungsten nickel steel alloy, you have an immensely potent, strong, very strong either ammunition or tank armor. That's like, the penetrators on the sabot rounds, the tungsten penetrators, tungsten sabot rounds, in some cases, are even stronger than depleted uranium rounds. Tungsten is one of the hardest metals. Now, in its purest state, tungsten is very brittle, sort of like gold. Like gold in its pure state is very brittle. But when you add a binding agent, Tungsten is one of the hardest materials known to man. It's one of the hardest materials known to man. That's why if you have like 0.5% of tungsten in your rolled homogeneous steel armor, when you make an alloy that's a steel tungsten alloy, you have an immensely strong, hardy, very, very strong defensive armor for tanks or vehicles. You know that China produces 66,000 metric tons. 66,000 metric tons. The biggest, by a humongous gap, producer of tungsten on Earth. The next biggest producer is Vietnam at 4,500. China produces 66,000 tons. Metric tons. The steel is regular tons, the over 1 billion tons of steel. So they lead in a humongous gulf in steel, tungsten, and also aluminum. Or not aluminum, but yeah, they lead in aluminum too. But the metal I was about to say is titanium. They produce 110,000 metric tons of titanium. That's almost half of all the entire world's titanium production. It's almost half. The whole world combined produces 210,000. They produce 110,000. So, China, well, actually, that's a little over half, come to think of it. Yeah, China is this behemoth in production. They have 40% of the entire industrial base of the whole world. 40% in just China, of the entire world's industrial base. All in China, all of it. 40%. They have the biggest military industrial complex and the biggest civil industrial complex. China cannot be effed with in any sort of way, shape, or form. They cannot be defeated. Not in a conventional conflict, they can't. And even in a nuclear conflict, China has the most advanced nuclear arsenal. They don't have to have the most nukes. Not that it matters, because, there's never going to be a full-scale nuclear war. It's going to only be partial nukes with a lot of conventional fighting. Because if you believe your Bible, then you know that, it doesn't get blanketed by nukes completely. There's a lot of conventional forces that invade Mystery Babylon from all sides. China's not going to nuke their own troops. Neither is Russia. They're not going to do it. They're only going to use them when they feel they're absolutely necessary. Now, I've had dreams, horrifying dreams, of nukes hitting cities, but it wasn't everywhere. It's like, in my dreams, I didn't see everything get blanketed. It was just certain cities. And it was only by tactical nukes. It wasn't by these humongous, ginormous, whole area saturating, massive city-killing nukes. It was the smaller, they still destroy a lot of the city, but it was smaller. It wasn't these, 1 megaton warheads or 750 kiloton warheads, which is about 3/4 of a megaton. No, it was more like these 25 megatons. Still destroyed most of the city, but it wasn't like they didn't blanket everything with it. It was just certain cities. Mostly because the cities I saw in my dream had military bases in them. That probably is why they would use those, but even so, it's not going to be like, there's a full-scale nuke exchange. It doesn't happen like that. They will use some, but it's not going to be like people think. And I can say that for 100% certainty because I read my Bible and I know what my Bible says. And I believe in the Bible. The whole purpose of my channel is to corroborate prophecy with physical facts and findings. And that's what I intend to do all the time. And I do that. So, although I'll be getting off YouTube soon, I think there's enough resources on this channel that people can have to look back on, and, they'll see that, for the most part, it's all correct and in order. That's a lot of resources in the military domain that people can look at here, because there's a lot of people talking about military stuff that don't know the first thing about any of it. And this person I was talking to over there on that comment, I explained to him diligently why China is enormous. I told him China has the biggest, most technologically advanced Navy, Army, ground forces in general because of their paramilitary. They get handed down all the old and upgraded equipment that China has. Now our equipment is old and upgraded. We haven't had any new designs, really, of our Army stuff, our Army's equipment. Our Army really hasn't had any brand new, upgraded, whole new designs since, like what I'm saying is, instead of like the M1A2 where they made minor upgrades, it's an older upgraded platform. They haven't created any new platforms. No, they haven't. They haven't created no new platforms for 40 years now. For 40 years. China has upgraded a lot of their old stuff, but they pass it down the line to some of their second and also all their third-rate units, while their new units, or their not their new units, I mean their best units get all the new stuff. That's what I meant to say. Their best, like, top-tier units get their new stuff that comes fresh off the factory production lines. Like their two new tank designs, like the Type 96Bs and the Type 99As, which are the latest iterations of those two brand new tanks. You have ZBD-04s, ZBD-08 infantry fighting vehicles, which have these just amazing abilities to jam certain types of weapons that are fired at them. Same with the tanks, like anti-tank missiles, the guided kind, not the unguided so much, but the guided ones. They have these abilities. They have these immense capabilities of their weapon systems. They can fire anti-tank guided missiles from there. And I'm talking about not even just the tanks. I'm talking about the infantry fighting vehicles can do this. There are 100 millimeter anti-tank guided missiles that can be fired from their main cannon. They also have a 30 millimeter autocannon, like on the ZBD-04. They're very powerful. They're very powerful. Now, our infantry fighting vehicle, the Bradley, it has a 20 millimeter cannon. It's still pretty good. It's still pretty good for what it delivers. And so is the M1A2, but I'm saying China's been building brand new everything. New aircraft, new tanks, new infantry fighting vehicles, new armor personnel carriers, new everything. All their designs are brand new, and when I say brand new, I mean they're only like 20 years old. Like they've been built since like the past 20 years or earlier. Some of their designs are only 15 years old, so they're still within that brand spanking new time range. They're building brand new aircraft carriers, submarines, all of it. China is a world superpower, the world superpower, the true hegemon. They can never be broke because they have the most gold holdings on Earth. Over 6,400 tons. All they'll admit to having is 6,400 tons of gold. Tons. 6,400 tons. Russia is the next biggest gold holder. And I think it was 2,800 tons. I did a video for China and Russian gold holdings a long way back when I was still doing shorter videos. But I know China's is, that stays on my mind because it's just that immense. It's that big. 6,400 tons of gold plus? People think they have more? They'll only admit to that? They have more gold than anybody. They can never be broke. Plus, they're about to do a petro-yuan renminbi with the Middle Eastern nations. China has now troops all over the world, too, both through their Belt and Road Initiative and civil military fusion policy, where they have embedded troops in other countries that are disguised as students, workers, whatever else, business people. China has military personnel and paramilitary personnel the world over. They're building roads in Mexico, like that Mexican man that gave a guided tour, which I call it that, where he drove on a road built by Chinese paramilitary National Construction Corps forces for the future invasion of the United States. He has seen Chinese and Russian troops and Iranian and Pakistani forces firsthand in Mexico. He's seen them, and he's only seeing a small percentage of them because this invasion this coming year is going to be the biggest that the world has ever known or seen. It'll be bigger than Barbarossa, Operation Barbarossa, when the Germans invaded the USSR in 1941 in the summer. It was June 22nd when they invaded. They came in there with about 4 million Axis forces. 4 million. China owns a lot of our regime leaders. Whoever said that, let me see. You know why? Because their MSS, which is their prime intelligence agency, they've caught a lot of them in compromising positions and therefore have dirt over their head. Or they bribed the ones that are straight up traitors that'll take the bribe money. They would take the bribe money. They've bribed officials at the very top, and they've also caught a lot of them in dirt. They've caught a lot of them in dirt. Well, great to see you, Pamela. Yeah, they've caught a lot of them in dirt. So the Eastern elites are very different from the Western elites, and they're constantly in competition to decide what the NWO will be. Will it be an Eastern or a Western NWO? Well, I could tell you it'll be an Eastern NWO because Babylon gets destroyed in the Bible, and so does all their little woke allies too. I've already told people how small the four biggest NATO contributors are: France, Britain, Germany, and Italy. And how depleted their militaries are. They don't even upkeep or maintain them. And that's a pity because, you know what, at one time, the European forces in the Cold War back in the 80s, they had top-of-the-line equipment. They maintained their forces. They even had big forces, even though they were conscript forces. I mean, we had conscript forces too back in Vietnam and earlier. We had a conscript army. They had big conscript armies, but they were more motivated back then. They were better trained. There wasn't all this woke garbage going on around the Western world. You had motivated, dedicated, actually well-equipped, well-trained Western militaries back in the Cold War. But after the Cold War ended, so too did that. When Germany reunified, they had nearly between everything. I'm talking about East and West Germany. When the West Germans amalgamated with the old HVA, which was the the East German military, they had between reserves and active duty, they had almost 1 million troops under arms. And for a nation of Germany's size, that's pretty big. That's pretty big considering their nation's size. Now, they trimmed themselves down. They sold off a lot of the old East German equipment. They even sold off a lot of the West German-made stuff. They had this big army with a lot of artillery for their size. They had a lot of artillery, a lot of tanks, because they had these big tank formations during the Cold War, West Germany especially. They had a lot of artillery. They had a fairly decently sized air force. I mean, they had, between East and West Germany's air forces coming together, they had a big air force. Same with their navies combining. But they sold off so much of their stuff. And they're giving away what they should be keeping at this point. They're giving it away to their proxy, our proxy, the West's proxy over in Eastern Europe. They're giving it away. They're depleting themselves. They're hollowing themselves out. Again, I should have used that chart. Now, this chart is months old, but it showed up to the point that it was made, how much of our stuff that we've given away that we can't replace. It even has a column for if it's easy to replace for us or not. And a lot of those columns say that it would take years for certain items to be replaced. Years, like 7 to 10 years. And that's under normal conditions where our supply chain's actually running properly and working properly and meeting demand properly, where there's enough fuel to deliver things properly. Because let me tell you something. If the supply chain fails, if we run out of fuel because we refused to maintain our oil fields, which we have, you can't just get them back up and running lickety-split. You have to maintain those. You have to make sure all the equipment works, it's safe, make sure that it's not all like rusted and ruined and you have to replace all kinds of parts on it. They just shut everything down. You can't just get it back up and working literally overnight. It takes time. It takes technical experts. It takes engineers. It takes everything to make those things work again. Let me tell you something. We run out of fuel and we're at the mercy. We're at the mercy of the rest of the world for our fuel right now. We're at their mercy right now. If they all cut us off, we're done. Our military, they use 2.5 billion barrels of oil annually. And most of that's used by the Air Force. Most of it. Yeah. So, if we get cut off for our civil and military usage, we can't fight no war like that. Our Air Force will get annihilated on the ground in any war because they won't be able to have the fuel to take off. And in the state that the hollowed out state our military's in, being all woke and depleted and, the morale being at its all-time low, the morale is at an all-time low, let me tell you. So the morale being at an all-time low, which is their give-a-shit factor, whether they care or not, whether they even, train or not, which they don't, they don't have those bonds, they don't have that muscle memory like they used to when I was in, they're hollowed out. They have this new generation in there that can't do their job worth a damn. they'll get destroyed. You got Emma with her two mommies. I mean, come on now. Although that was just an advertisement, it is still an indication of the types of things that they're encouraging. They got their green projects where they're putting tens of billions into creating some sort of a green hybrid armored vehicle. And it said, when I read more up on this, it said that it could take them perhaps a decade or so to even create something like this that works. A decade from now, we'll be invaded by China a decade from now. You'd think they could be buying things that are tried and true instead, but no, they're throwing all this money into that. They're throwing all this money into the proxy. They're giving away all our weapons that we can't replace with our now little rinky-dink arms industry that's nowhere near the size of China's. Now that China was a bunch of factory-building fools who built, over 500 massive industrial complexes since the late 90s, since the end of the 90s. They all came online around the mid-2010s, about 2017, 2018. And that's also when the Pentagon supercomputers projected us losing every single solitary war simulation to China. We also lose combined with our allies included, we also lose to Russia in the NATO war games, where they actually war game. We lose to Russia. So we lose every single solitary war simulation on the Pentagon's own supercomputers to China. So they're crunching figures, much like the types of figures that I've found out on my own. And then some. I'm sure that they know about things about China that I don't even know. And they know even more dirt about the, decay of our forces than even I know. And I know a hell of a lot about these topics. It's something I really devote a lot of time and energy and effort into my studies into this. This is something I read up on everything from individual vehicles to, just different doctrines of different militaries and how they do things and, how our militaries become and how they've disintegrated and compared to what they used to be. I mean, I read up on everything from equipment to tactics to all of it. I study all of it. I'm a big history buff. I love history, war history. I love it all. And, just everything from ancient history to now, to modern history. I combine aspects of everything, plus my own personal experience in combat when I write my stories. I take aspects of what I experienced or what others around me went through, and I put that in my stories with what I know about enemy equipment and doctrines and tactics, with everything else, I mean, then I make these awesome presentations that so very few people either, get to see because of the algos, or maybe they just don't find it interesting, but they should, because these are the very things that are going to happen to this country. They will happen like that. They absolutely 100% will. And I could say that with a lot of emphasis because it's true. And those stories are a best case scenario for us, where we don't have a collapse first or an internal conflict that thins us out even more. No, that story is a best case where they just basically come in headstrong and invade us before we've even collapsed or had an internal conflict. That's what that story depicts. And even in a best case, we get our asses annihilated. We get annihilated. Think about how much easier it'll be when that equipment comes in firing and most of our best people are gone. All our communications will be gone by then anyway, probably from all the infighting. But even if there's anything left, they're going to down our anti-satellite weapons with their FK-2000s or probably lasers by this point. They probably got some even better than that. Same with the Russians with their S-500s or whatever even better than that they've got. Chinese and Russians are going to down all our satellites. They're going to gouge out all our eyes and make us deaf by removing our satellites and cyber hacking us, because there are cyber attacks that they can shut down our whole grid with. They don't have to use an EMP. They can do a cyber attack that can shut everything down. Do you know why? Because all our sewage treatment plants, all our power plants, all of our telecommunications are all hooked up to the internet. They're all hooked up to the internet. It's insane. So they don't have to totally blow all the fuses with an EMP. They can save their money. They can maybe reuse the grid after they finish their invasion, like in my stories. When they finish their invasion in my typed out stories, they turn the grid back on after about 6 months. They turn the grid back on because they intend on moving in Chinese colonists to colonize the United States. It becomes new China. It becomes new China. So this guy tried to tell me that China, can't project their power. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, bullshit. And I proceeded to tell him why. And like I said, they, or the algos, removed my comment. YouTube removed my comment everywhere anymore. I try to leave detailed comments. They get removed by YouTube when it's about military-related affairs. When I try to explain all the facts and figures on why China is the world hegemon. And they are. They're massive. And I didn't even finish saying what I was going to say about their nuclear arsenal. They can cloak all their missiles. They have the technology to cloak their missiles from sight and from infrared signatures. Just like they can do to aircraft now. They can do that to their missiles. They can spend the money and cloak their missiles. And I'm sure they have, because their arsenal overall, I'm talking about just the amount of nukes they have. They have about 1,000 nukes. It's not the low ball estimate of 350 or 400. Or 450. It's the median, the high median of 1,000. That's their real nuke numbers. Do you know why? Because of the fissile material they've had access to for the last 25, 30 years. They've had 22 tons of enriched uranium. They've had about between 2 and 4 tons of plutonium. I'd say probably closer to 4. So that's easily enough fissile material to make over 1,000 nukes. But, let's be reasonable. And assume that it is about 1,000 because of all the added missile silos, and then you add to that the amount of warheads each of their intercontinental ballistic missiles, their ICBMs that they have for intercontinental fire, their longest range. Let's say that, between the 2 warheads that each can carry, multiplied by the amount of silos, the added silos they have, and then added to their old silos, it's about 1,000. Plus they have rail mobile and road mobile launching platforms for their ICBMs. Road and rail mobile, silo-based, they have enough that it's obviously about 1,000. It could be more, but I'm going to say it's about 1,000 because their nuke arsenal is a state secret. The exact number is a state secret. With 500 nukes, you can annihilate a country the size of the United States, or even Russia because of how their population's spread out. But, China has 1,000. They can destroy 2 massive countries with the arsenal size they have. They don't have to overdo it. They just have to have enough to do it, and they do have enough to do it. That's why China is still the world's superpower, because they have the biggest conventional forces. They're highly technologically advanced. Their electronic warfare is just like what the Russians have, like how the Russians shut off the whole USS Donald Cook, which is supposed to be our best type of destroyer, an Aegis-class destroyer. They shut that off like a light switch with their jamming pods, their Kirkuk's system that they put on their Su-25, and then they did it again in early 2021. Same ship, same place. Su-24 this time, same jamming pods. Now the Chinese, they have on their Mumian Island base, they have their electronic warfare system set up on Mumian Island. And you know what they did? They almost caused 2 F-35s that strayed within the outer range of their electronic warfare field. They almost caused them to lose control of their F-35s and crash into the sea. So China can do the same things. They just came within range of it, to the edge of it, and they almost crashed. So imagine in wartime, we're fighting a country like China or Russia. They turn on all their electronic warfare. They integrate it with their anti-satellite and cyber warfare capabilities, which China has the best cyber warfare program on Earth. They also have they and Russia have the best electronic warfare. They both have hypersonics, and they're well advanced into their hypersonics. China is the only country that has ever tested successfully a few times their fractional orbital bombardment, where their missile circumnavigates the Earth and then fires a hypersonic glide vehicle the rest of the way for the terminal strike, where it flies in at an extremely high rate, excessively high rate of speed and maneuverability, and cannot be hit. And no, we don't have lasers that can hit anything like that. Our lasers are designed to hit subsonic targets. We don't have a radar that can track a hypersonic during its entire flight path, because it'll go through different radar ranges, radar fields. If this thing moves so fast and maneuvers so much there's no way to acquire it as a target and thus be able to actually hit it successfully, because its flight path is so fast and so unpredictable that you cannot target something like that. It moves through the field of a targeting radar too quick to be able to lock onto it and hit it with something. Plus, the things we could hit it with probably aren't even fast enough. You cannot shoot down hypersonics. There's no defense for it. People don't understand this. They think we have stuff that we really don't have, I mean, we hide all our high-tech stuff in labs at the bottom of, area, whatever, ascribe a number, 50, 58, Studio 54, whatever the hell. We got our tech hidden. We don't mass deploy, mass produce, mass deploy, mass train anybody on it, because in the military, you go to AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training. They don't have AIT for no anti-gravity craft. The only people that can fly something like maybe the TR-3B would be the test pilots. The test pilots, because we don't mass produce and have a base that trains people on that stuff. We don't. We don't have a factory that builds those things. They build it underground. It's like a once in a, it's like a rarity. It's a novelty. It's a novelty item. Same with the other high-tech stuff. China, they don't have a problem with keeping secrets. They're a repressive police state regime, and they can build their high technology above ground and mass produce it. Same with Russia. But China especially, because they have cameras everywhere. Their MSS is like worse. It's worse than the Gestapo and the NKVD all rolled into one. It's their secret police and their CIA type organization rolled together, and they liaison with their military intelligence in China for the PLA plus the paramilitary. They liaison between them all. And if they ever got in a war, which they will, they'll liaison together with the intelligence agencies of their allies, like the Russian military intelligence or their FSB, which that's Russia's, their type of like F to the B to the I combined with the CIA. That's basically their intel agency, like the MSS is for China, the Ministry for State Security. So China keeps tabs on all its workers that produce high-tech equipment. They lead the world in robotics, AI, lasers. They have robots that look like humans. They have androids. They lead the world in AI. They lead the world in electronic warfare. They and Russia together, that Russia has robots too, but China has come very far on their robotic designs. They have robots that are basically androids. They look like people. China, Korea, South Korea, and Japan are insanely advanced when it comes to robotics, far more than Europe or North America. China especially, they lead the world. They can make miniature artificial stars. They have particle colliders. They have all kinds of technologies. You don't think they're going to use them in a war? Think again. While we have our novelty items that we hide away, we don't mass produce, mass deploy, mass train people on, because it takes time to train people on very high technology items, China is. They are doing that. They are. They don't have to hide it. They can terminate, literally and metaphorically, they can terminate anybody who they suspect is a traitor and is going to, sell off any of their technology to anybody else if it's unauthorized. They spy on other workers. They don't have to worry about leaking secrets. They don't have to worry about that in China. So, that's basically really the only benefit of a totalitarian state is if you're the regime, you don't have to worry about people leaking secrets, because you could spy on all of them and just tap if they're or kidnap them in the middle of the night and take them somewhere. That's China's. That's their style. That's how they do things. China leads in lasers, directed energy. People don't think they're going to use this in war? Think again. Their navy is the most advanced navy in the world. Their combat air fleet, the biggest, most advanced, so is their navy, and so are their ground forces. They have the biggest land-based, when it bleeds over into the sea and air-based, missile forces on Earth. Nobody can compete with them. Nobody. That guy actually told me China can't project power. Yeah, right. They already have. Oh, and before I forget, I was on another place talking to somebody else. I was talking to one of my friends. She has a new channel. I was talking to her, and we were talking about the road issue, about China building roads inside America now, not just like in Mexico or in Canada or anywhere around us. It's happening in America, in Texas and California, which was interesting to hear. Those are Trojan shock forces. That's all I could say about it. They're Trojan shock forces. And there's a lot of Chinese ads now. Well, China, remember, and I've already talked about this a long time ago, they've infiltrated basically every American multinational corporation. They sit on the boards of these and make policies that favor the CCP. So you're going to see more and more subversion and takeover, infiltration. You're going to see it. It's going to start to manifest itself throughout society because they're going to control a lot of aspects of society. This is going to be new China, so never forget that. So everything they do, they own the most land in America. That's their forward operating bases for their future invasion, for the Trojan shock forces of the CCP and all their allies like Russia and Pakistan, North Korea, whoever is jumping on board that in that coalition. Just like in my audiobook, people would be wise. It would behoove people to listen to that. It's the most realistic rendition of such a thing anybody could ever see, or hear, rather. So, yeah, I'll be getting off YouTube soon, because I have a mountain of resources on this channel, and they're free to everybody. Copy, rip, paste, save, whatever. Take it all, just don't take it out of context, its original context. But people are free to use everything. I'm going to leave it up as a floater channel. I might go and make comments on other people's videos, or might share something here and there in the community tab if, support my friends or whatever. But I'll be done. When I'm done with my project, I'm off of YouTube. I'll do a good long farewell stream, but, I thought that I should come on since, I didn't do a Friday stream. So I'm going to talk to the audience, whoever's remaining, before I get off here. This is a really good stream. Let's see. Who's all in here? Hey, Mary. And Chad, Crawford, and MIC, and Point Fire. Yeah, those, every time I talk about them, and that's only the tip of the iceberg, Point Fire, because they have forward operating bases for their military and their paramilitary. But those police stations, that's like the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, they're there too. They're there too. This is a sign of a failed state. When your regime in a nation doesn't have a full monopoly on power, that's a sign of a failed state. That means America's a failed state if there's Chinese and car-tels coming and enforcing their policies and their will on American soil. That's a sign of a weak and failing regime and a failed state. So yeah, if they're enforcing Chi-Com laws or Sharia in some places or whatever else, that's a sign of a failed state. Or the cartels doing what they do, that's all a sign of a failed state, because that regime no longer has a monopoly on control of its own nation. Yep. China's a world superpower. What did you say, Ontario Storms? I don't like trolls here. Let's see. Yeah, great to see you too, Crystal. Thank you. Yeah, exactly, Fear No Man. Yeah, see, it's going to be an Eastern New World Order. That's what people in the West can't fathom or understand. It's not going to be a Western New World Order. They think it is, but it's not going to, because the 10 kings are going to be 10 Eastern kings, the 10 kings of Revelation that give their power to the beast. They're going to be 10 kings of the East, and they're going to give all their power to the beast, the man of sin. There will be no West. The West isn't even mentioned after Babylon's destroyed. That's the last we hear of it. It'll be an Eastern New World Order led predominantly by China and Russia as the two most powerful of the 10 kings. But it'll be the BRICS nations for sure, like BRICS Plus. It'll be those countries, and they're going to establish the NWO. See, people in the West can't fathom that. They can't understand that, but that's the way it's going to be, because the West gets destroyed and occupied, gets taken over and colonized. It'll be colonized by China and Russia predominantly, but also their allies. They've surpassed us. People have to get that through their head. They have surpassed us, They have infiltrated, subverted. They're ready to take over. They could take over any time. They don't have to wait for an internal conflict and a collapse. They could take over any time. The one world currency will be an Eastern currency. You know, they'll put it on everybody who took the mark. It'll be an Eastern currency to download onto their mark of the beast. That's how it'll be. And China and Russia will be the biggest enforcers of this system because they're the most powerful nations in the world, especially China. Nobody is on China's level. Realistically, due to the facts and figures, nobody can compete with China. Nobody is that powerful or that wealthy or that industrialized or has that big of a armed forces. You know, and they still, even though they don't have the biggest nuke arsenal, they have enough to destroy two large nations. Easily. Which is enough to still be the world's superpower, even at the third biggest official nuclear arsenal, along with the economics. See, our economy's fake. It's built on a house of cards. It's built on usury and debt. It's a, you know, all when we once had all these small businesses that all, like, we lost a third of our economy when they shut them all down and people couldn't get through because they didn't save up, but they didn't have enough money on hand, or they couldn't make money with their small businesses. We lost a third of our economy. I reported on that from the Federal Reserve's own numbers. We lost 1/3 of our entire economy back in 2020. Imagine how broken down it is now. Nah, man, I hate that R word. I hate the R word. It is a depression, and we're about to go into a super depression. Recession, my ass. I hate that word. If I hear that word one more time, it's like saying that we're in the worst economic times, and all the window dressing they do to conceal it. We are in the worst economic times we've ever been in. Realistically speaking, this is worse than the Great Depression, but because of all the generous welfare programs and handouts and everything else, you know, and window dressing to try and hide the fact that everything's so horrible, you know, yeah, okay, it seems normal, but things seem normal in certain places during the Great Depression too. But this is a super depression. It's going to get so much worse. For the West, especially. The East isn't having these problems. Russia's economy grew. China's not having these problems either. Their economy is actually experiencing growth too. And even if we do sanctions on them, it'll boomerang around on our ass, like what happened to Europe when they tried to put sanctions on Russia. It'll boomerang right back because you know why? They've separated themselves from our system. They were both on SWIFT. China still technically is, but China has their own SIPS system. They have their own financial transaction messaging system. So does Russia with their FSPS. It doesn't matter. That's why you can put sanctions on them and it does nothing to them, literally nothing. But it hurts us because China, they're the workshop of the world. How are you going to put sanctions? It's more like an embargo, not sanctions, because they have the real economy while we have a fake economy of fiat and usury and debt. We don't even have a bunch of small businesses like we used to anymore. So many of them closed because of all the stupidity that happened back in 2020. They all closed. You know, imagine how broken down our economy is now when it was 1/3 of the way busted down. GDP and everything with it. GDP too. GDP by their own numbers. It was 1/3 back then. We're probably like half the GDP we once were in real terms. Real terms. You know, they can't inflate it. They give fake statistics to try to inflate our GDP because of the inflation. So, you know, the real GDP is more like $10 trillion by now instead of like, what is it? Like they put it as like 20 trillion or some BS. It's a lie. It's a total lie. Real GDP is like 10 trillion. We're like getting down into like Japan territory for like GDP. Now, China's real GDP, oh man, it's enormous. It's enormous. China has like, what was that? I even put a chart of it. Back in 2020, China's GDP, real GDP, was already bigger than ours by a few trillion. Man, by now, their GDP is probably the size of what our national debt is, if you include purchasing power parity and everything. Their GDP is probably like 30 trillion, and ours has shrunk to like 10 trillion. Real terms, not fake, inflated, fake statistic terms, real terms, based off of real admissions and statistics. No, China's massively bigger. They have real industry. We barely have any industry. We don't produce anything like we used to. We really don't. If anything, all we do when components arrive here, we might have assembly plants and things like that, but they try to count that as full production when it's not. We don't really fully produce very much anymore. I mean, yeah, we produce some things, but it's not like it once was. It's not like the 80s or 90s. We have shrunk immensely in production. We could never compete with anybody like China in a war, nor Russia, because Russia outproduces us in war materiel, and that's a fact. That's a fact. So, in China, they produce 3 times what Russia does because of all the factories they added. We have one tank factory, and we almost closed it down. The one in Lima, Ohio, that's our one tank factory, and we almost closed it down. That's insane. China has a handful of tank factories. Plus, they have dozens of factories that produce shells and missiles and bullets and mortars and rockets and everything else. And the systems that fire them. The APCs, IFVs, MRAPs, trucks, armored trucks, everything. Scout vehicles. Air defense vehicles, air defense artillery. They have the best air defense network in the world. So does Russia. They're pretty much tied on air defense. Plus, they're tied in artillery. But China has the biggest armored vehicle fleet on the face of the earth. When you combine their humongous, they have the biggest tank fleet, biggest armored personnel, infantry fighting vehicle, and armored fighting vehicle fleet, which is like your MRAPs, armored trucks, things like that. If you combine it all, China is like, oh my man, we cannot compete with that. And they have so much stuff in storage for their second and third rate units, like their reserves, plus all their paramilitary, their 20 million man paramilitary. They have this rinky-dink 2.2 million man, and they're so hollowed out and just spread around the world, depleted, woke, garbage, can't train like they used to. Somebody needs to whip them in shape before it's too late. I mean, it might be too late now. Somebody needs to whip them in shape. That's why it's a shame that all these mercs are dying in a proxy war for a proxy. They're fighting. They're basically just volunteering themselves to be pawns for the Western elites. And some foreigners even go fight for Russia in their Russian Foreign Legion, which is part of their paramilitary, even though it's it's not officially, but I call it their Foreign Legion because it does wet works for the Kremlin. They are part of their Ministry of Defense, even though they try to distance themselves so that they can do wet works. And I'm talking about the Wagner Group. They also have Syrians volunteering, Iranians. That's a paramilitary outfit that is actually part of the Russian Ministry of Defense, but they pass them off as a PMC, a private military corporation, which they're not. They are not. They're just the Russian Foreign Legion, more or less. That's what I call them. It's basically what they are. But, yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know, Ken. I mean, they probably see what's going on. They probably understand that, the future doesn't look so good for them. You're going to see a lot of Europeans changing their minds once they realize how bad winter's been for them. I don't see, they're not going to come out of winter. They're not going to survive winter and come out the other end. They're not. There's no way. If they keep being bullheaded, if their leaders keep being bullheaded, they're going to drive them into the ground completely. It's like they're going to burn the whole place down to the ground, all the way to the ground. And the Russians and the Chinese troops that are in Europe, because the Chinese are in Belarus now, all the armored formations, the big heavy Chinese armored formations that drilled outside of Moscow, they did war games with the Russians, they moved them further west into Belarus. They're getting ready to take over Europe, y'all. Western Europe. They're going to take over NATO. All the Chinese forces in Serbia, too. You all know they went there. All those streams of cargo aircraft making back and forth flights, dropping off troops and materiel, plus all the armor and whatever other heavy formations they brought through the ports of Montenegro, because Montenegro couldn't pay back their Belt and Road loans on their superhighway that was built by the Chinese, nor for the port facilities. So naturally, China is going to force them to pay it back by allowing them to use their ports to bring in their tank fleets and whatever else, all their heavy equipment. So we know they're getting ready to put a stomping on Europe. Even though Russia could do it by themselves. They could do it by themselves. They're already 3 times bigger than combining Russia's 3 times bigger than combining Germany, Italy, Britain, and France, all their numbers of personnel, plus all the equipment. The equipment's abysmal. The equipment they have is abysmal compared to Russia. I mean, and what we have in Europe, it ain't even going to be a speed bump for Russia. Russia would run right over our forces. They'd rip us a new asshole. If we tried to get involved over there and something like that, they're going to rip us a new asshole. And if somebody is unhinged enough to try an FF event over there with a dirty thing, Russia, you're going to see the West disengage from that proxy. They're going to disengage from supporting that so quick because they're going to want to avoid being annihilated for it. They're going to disengage from that so quick. You're going to see them run away from that faster than you've ever seen anybody run in your life, just so they can avoid being wiped out as a result, so they can avoid a retaliation. They're going to deny it. They're going to deny any ties. They're going to stop supporting Ukraine. You mark my words. If anybody does a type of FF like that, you're going to see it. You're going to see that happen. You're going to see the West run away from that whole thing so fast, faster than anybody's ever run in your life. You mark these words. You will see that. Because it's just too early. It's too early. It's too early. And I'm talking prophetically. There's so much more that has to happen. So if something like that were to happen, you would see some different plot twists, and one of them would be the West would run away from that so damn quick just to avoid an exchange. You would see them run away from that so quick, disengage, make apologies, everything. You'd see the whole thing. They blame Zelensky. Oh, yeah, you would see that. 100%. Mark my words. If that happens, that's exactly what you would see. Russia had never said that they would use nukes first. They're not losing. They're not losing. That's part of the narrative that they're losing. It's a false narrative. They're building up 300,000 troops to overrun that country. They're building them up in Belarus and in Belgorod, in the area of Belgorod in Russia, so that they can sweep all the way down. Now that they've ground Ukraine down to the dust. With their, like I showed you at the beginning of this video, with their defensive lines, their artillery. It's been an artillery and missile conflict. Very rarely did they have exchanges of actual mobile warfare. Most of that was at the beginning, but, you had instances like Kharkov. They ceded a little ground to the Ukrainians so they can move in and then shell the hell out of them and then move right back in. They've done that twice now in Kharkov. And places like Kherson, they've just been grinding them down. Same within the central part of the front there. That's a little tiny force that ground down virtually most of the Ukrainian armed forces, where they're on their 7th or 8th mobilization now, and you have youngsters trying to break their bones to get out of being recruited to fight for the Ukrainians. They can't compete with Russia. They can't. They just can't. It doesn't matter how much weaponry the West gives them and how many foreign mercs go in there to use it, since the Ukrainians aren't trained on it and it would take them a long time to train with it. It doesn't matter what happens there. They're going to lose. They're about, when the ground freezes at the end of November, the Russians, they're probably, that's most likely when they're going to launch their invasion. I don't think realistically, let's listen to reason. Let's listen to reason. Realistically, I think they're going to get this thing over as fast as they can, because I don't think they want to give anybody a chance to try and pull an FF event. I think it would be the most responsible, reasonable thing if they would just go ahead and wrap this all up. And they've ground them down for 7 months, and they've not been dislodged. No, they've never been able to dislodge that tiny force that's been holding the East, all the way from Kherson and a crescent moon all the way up to Kharkiv. They've not been able to dislodge them from there. When they did their feint attack at the beginning for Kiev, they only sent about 4,000 troops. I mean, they only sent in a regiment and a battalion of Spetsnaz. The regiment was the 106th Guards Air Assault Brigade, and their parent unit was the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, okay? And then they sent the Spec Ops. All they did was occupy key nodes, like a few air bases and airports, and then, then they left. They came back from whence they came, They went back from whence they came. And while they did that, they pinned down a lot of forces around the capital, like they planned to, and then they pulled out. When they put all their forces in the east that they needed to move in there. That's how pinning actions work, okay? People don't understand tactics. They don't understand any basic tactics. Now, what's going to happen is they're just going to blitz that place, because 300,000 troops plus all they have in the east already. I mean, that's they're going to be like a tidal wave. You got the Ukrainians so damn laser focused on the east, they're not going to see what's coming from the north. They're going to get run over. They're going to get stomped. They're going to mud holes stomped in their ass, But it would be responsible if they just hurry up and finish this thing, because it's been going on too damn long. But I mean, I get why they did it. They did weaken the West as a result, because the sanctions boomeranged, and they got the West to commit all of these resources and all this money. They basically dried us out. They've dried us out, just like they did in the local area to the Ukrainians. They've dried us out and the proxy. And then when they run over Ukraine, it'll be easy to run over Europe next, because Europe has nothing left. Really, they don't. I've read all the equipment they have and the numbers, and they have got woke militaries like we do. You know, we sent these enormous stocks of shells. We've depleted. We've hollowed ourselves out. How are we going to fight Russia, much less the world superpower China, who hasn't even done anything yet and has these just ginormous gargantuan numbers of everything in terms of stocks, storage numbers, active numbers, all of that. I mean, their navy, their combat air fleet, ground forces, strategic missile forces, all of it is the biggest in the world. All of it. All of it. How are we going to fight them? What a joke. What a joke. But anyway, I went on my spiel. Forgot to talk to people a little more before I get off here. I've been going almost a good hour and 30 minutes. This was a great live. Very informative, I hope. I showed some visuals and I explained facts and figures. This should help. Oh, yeah, up in Canada? Yeah, I'm sure it is. Oh, Canada has a really small military, and they have a woke military, too, like we do. It's all a bunch of wokesters. What a shame. What a joke. The West is a disaster. The West has become a disaster because the Western elites are running their own power block into the ground, and they don't realize that a much stronger set of elites in the East are going to come in and take them over. Because these Eastern elites, I've already explained and broke down diligently, even using historical examples, why there is a Western and Eastern elites, and I've showed modern examples of the difference between the East and West. There are Eastern elites, and they have very different goals from the West. They want to take over the West, and they want to implement their NWO. They've always wanted to. Just look at the speeches in the Chi-Com Politburo. I mean, it's insane. Wei Fang wants to colonize the United States. He said so very articulately in his speech. But anyway, exactly, Ken. Exactly. You're on it. You said it all right there. There shouldn't be. Yeah, BD, I think that the fuel situation is going to be a disaster. We've been technically in a food and fuel crisis since the end of August, and now it's finally being revealed by mainstream sources because they can't cover it up any longer. See, the rail strike thing, I think that was part of a cover-up, you know, to try and like cover up the fact that there's so few diesel left for the trains and everything else and all the trucks. It's been bad. It's been really bad. And the food, too. The food's a disaster. Talking about not even enough damn turkeys for Thanksgiving. What a disaster. Not that I do Thanksgiving or any other holidays, you know. I mean, I go eat with family and stuff, but I mean, I'm not like really all like a holiday guy. Like, I'm not like really all about it or anything. I mean, I don't do, you know, man's feast days. I treat every day like a normal day. Every day is God's day, but still. The dude. Well, I'm not a fan of Russia or China or even the West. I tell it like it is. I stay neutral and unbiased. I'm an unbiased fact collector. I'm a record keeper. I keep records. I'm an amateur researcher and, you know, professional researcher because I'm unbiased. I'm an amateur researcher, professional, and analyst. I collect facts, and if the facts favor one side, then I have to admit it. If the facts favor another side, then I have to admit that. You know, I'm neutral. They're both evil to me. The West and the East, they're both evil because they both have their own evil plans for the world, basically. But if you want to support who you want to support, I mean, hey, who am I to criticize you? But I wouldn't support them. I wouldn't support any of them. It's a proxy conflict, and they're grinding a lot of people in that meat grinder over there, mostly Western mercs and Ukrainians, but, you know, Russians and their volunteers. You know, it's war. Everybody dies in war. Just some sides suffer a lot more than others. Not as many Russians have died as Ukrainians, but, you know, nobody should be having to go over there and be part of that. You know, I'm interested in the military aspects, like the tactics and things, but as far as how it affects human life, it's a disaster. It's horrible. It's horrible. A lot of innocent people are being killed too. Shouldn't be. I'm more interested in the field of battle, like what happens on the battlefield itself. I mean, the human aspect is a tragedy. War is always a tragedy. You know, when I was in Iraq, well, I'm not gonna talk about that. I'm just gonna say the war is a tragedy. But I am a warrior because that's how God made me. So, you know, it's like a paradox. It's hard to explain. It's a paradox. It is a paradox. When you have a military mind and you know your interests lay there, I mean, but you know there's a lot of human tragedy. It's a paradox. I fully understand because I've understood that firsthand for many years now, and I've dealt with it. Not always in the best ways either. Well, great to see everybody. Mary and Brogan, BD, and MIC, and of course Ken, and who else? And Rebecca, and who else is here? BD, Chad Crawford, and just want to greet everybody before I go. And of course, Snafu, my friend, him, and Alan too, my other friend, Aura. All right, everybody. You all be blessed. You all have a really good night. And Mary and Iffy and Trucker J. Hey, Trucker JP, what's up? The dude and all right. I think I said everybody. Point Fire and yep. Oh yeah, Peekaboo and Pamela and you all have a great night. Thank you.